All right, hello everyone, and thank you for tuning in once again to the Black Box Podcast. BBOR, Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia. And if you hear anything in the background, we just have a little bit of rain going on. It's been a very rainy summer. But let's get to the topic of today. Today we're talking all about Chris Watts and the family that he sadly left behind. You see, what happened is this is actually kind of one of the more saddening cases that we would be talking about, or that we could even begin to talk about over the course of the year. I mean, we were following the case of Gypsy Rose Blanchard. We did an upload about that recently, and multiple people started comparing it to the case of Chris Watts. That was one that I hadn't heard about before. And I'm hearing these little debates in the comments section, and even Dr. Phil, who not only interviewed Gypsy Rose Blanchard, but also is making that the subject of his podcast, made a comparison with the Chris Watts case. And I was like, well, I need to learn more about this case. I mean, if everybody's kind of having this sort of kind of psychological debate about what's going on, you just got to learn more about some things sometimes. So I was watching the full-length documentary they had online, as well as some other stuff, some interviews. We'll say something about the interviews later on. But what's up with this guy, Chris Watts? I mean, he is an individual who seemed to have had it all. Beautiful wife, children, very nice house. He had a career, but it wasn't enough. And he turned to violence, murdering his wife, murdering his children, 2 daughters, and even his wife was pregnant at the time. That included the murder of his unborn son, which he was charged with. And they have a full-length documentary about this on YouTube, and even when it starts out, I just remember thinking wow, his wife is beautiful. Wow, that's such a nice house. I mean, I don't even own a microwave. I mean, this guy just had so many wonderful things. It's and he didn't appreciate any of it. It wasn't enough. And I am aware, though, that they were experiencing a certain amount of financial hardship, in the sense that it might have been difficult to live any sort of lavish or above average lifestyle, especially because Chris Watts was having an affair with another woman. And while his family is out seeing relatives, he would go out and see his other girlfriend and take trips with her. Which, if you're a family who's tight on money, which I'm sure many of us Americans have been, you know that taking your girlfriend out for day trips is going to add up, especially when you're also doing little vacation trips to the sand dunes and the auto museum, whatever they said it was. That's going to add up in expenses. But the thing is, though, Chris Watts just couldn't deal with it. He couldn't deal with the concept of divorce. So, one night, he murdered his wife. He murdered his 2 daughters. Suffocation. And that included, of course, as we mentioned, the murder of his unborn child. And he slowly brought their bodies into his pickup truck. He spent 50 minutes packing his pickup truck to go to work. And the thing is, though, he was working at an oil battery, an oil site, which he knew that no one else would be at. He buried his wife in a shallow grave, and he dropped each of his daughters into an oil tank. 2 separate oil tanks, mind you. And the issue with this one is, it's you can hear the interviews with Chris Watts, you can see him talking a lot. It's how on earth did he expect to get away with it? There were surveillance cameras everywhere. I mean, all types of CCTV footage. And I believe somebody even remarked about one of his neighbors saw the truck leaving at a time that she thought was odd. We're talking about witnesses, surveillance cameras, let alone, how do you just deal with your family disappearing? I don't know. And it's you really have to wonder just about the process that's going on. About the sort of likelihood that this crime would have succeeded. Not to mention that he voluntarily talked to the police. He appeared on national television. First he appeared on local television, we should say. Then the national television stuff heated up a little bit later. But taking the polygraph test, did he think that he was just such a good actor that he could just convince all these other people? Leaving an enormous amount of physical evidence. There's a full-length documentary about this that's online for free. And I was watching it, and I was really thinking that it was a very excellent presentation. I say that because they just used the primary source information. It's just like scenes of the police interrogation, scenes of like the police investigating Chris Watts' house, like the speeches that were given at the trial by the lawyers and the families of the victims, which I should say, I guess I have to admit, that is still the family of Chris Watts, even though they might not think of him that way anymore. Especially not the family of his wife, Shanann. It's like, they probably don't think of him as family anymore, but they were giving, their things. Like, you can see all of the primary source material. And I mentioned Gypsy Rose Blanchard recently. There's a full-length documentary about that on YouTube as well, but with that one, they had lots of commentators. They even had a freelance journalist who wasn't directly connected to the story participating in the documentary. But the thing is, though, I thought it was a great way to just cut out some of the one-sided nature, and they're just showing you the actual events. Like, they have enough media. You can see the videotape of Chris Watts slowly loading in his truck in the morning, and the things that he is carrying in are dead bodies. They're just in, like, you can't even make it out too clearly. I don't know how to describe it, but he's loading dead bodies into his truck at an early hour in the morning so he could drive to a secluded site where he was supposed to be working, buried his wife in a shallow grave, dropped each of his daughters into separate oil tanks, and he thought he would get away with it. Horrendously low probability that this would succeed. The issue that I would say is, so many people are like, why? That's the question that they're asking. Why? Like, well, I'll tell you why. I don't think that I have ever seen a bigger case of money, sex, or power. They even said this in the trial, in Chris Watts' trial. Get a divorce. Why didn't he get a divorce? Well, the issue is money. Because he would have had to have paid alimony. He would have had to have paid child support. He might have lost his house in the divorce to his wife. You don't necessarily know what the outcome of that would be, and he wouldn't have been able to fund the lifestyle that he wanted with the new woman. He wouldn't have been able to pay for that. So the only conclusion that he could come to was murdering his family. Disgusting. Absolutely despicable. But the thing is, you're talking about money, sex, or power. Alright, so he has a financial motive. He doesn't want to go through the financial losses that he will take in the divorce. Sex. He's with somebody that he prefers to be with over his wife. Power. He wants control of his life. He just wants to have control over everything. He doesn't want his wife to control him. He doesn't want the responsibilities of being a father as well as being a husband. He just wants it to be his new girl and him, and he wanted all the money for himself, and that's what it goes on to. I mentioned recently that I'm a fan of Forensic Files. And I've been listening to the Forensic Files podcast. They have it all up on radio.com. You can get it all for free. And I swear, every other episode is just talking about somebody took out a life insurance policy on their significant other, or even in one case, the business partner. Like, I didn't know you could take one out for your business partner, but every other case, it's like someone took out a life insurance policy on somebody, and it's either a murder or an attempted murder. And then they learned about the $800 million insurance policy that he had taken out 2 weeks prior to the disappearance. It's like, it's just something that happens. So many people do not want to go through the financial hardship of a divorce. It is a consistent motivation for people to commit murders. And there's absolutely nothing that is surprising about Chris Watts, except for the fact that he also murdered his children and disposed of their bodies in such an inhumane way. That's really it. That's some disturbing stuff. It really is. It's very, very disturbing that he would just like going after his kids and bringing them into that. You know what you do though? You take a whole bunch of money, you convince your girlfriend to run off to Mexico or Peru or maybe to China or maybe to East Timor with you. Then you can escape some of the financial hardship associated with divorce. And then you can just start over or something like that. But really, though, it's a money, sex, and power thing. It's not really about any solutions. He wanted to take control, even if it meant doing something destructive, heinous, and despicable. Control. I mean, like, we've been following a lot of similar cases for a while here. And the kind of consistency that we can see in is that selfishness knows no limitations. It does not matter how low, whatever you think, no matter what you think at the lowest humanity can go, somebody will go lower. And that would be Chris Watts. There are a couple interviews with him online, and it's like, I tried to listen to one of them. Those like over 2 hours long. I got about 10 minutes into it, and it was just like, I couldn't tolerate it anymore. Just the kind of cheerful laughing. I mean, just listening to this guy that murdered his wife and children, who dropped each of his daughters into oil tanks to hide the bodies, and he's just laughing with interviewers. It's just, I was like, I can't listen to any more of this. Also, as we said though, I don't think that this is any sort of deep psychological mystery. I don't think that this is anything that is very difficult to crack. I mean, once again, I think that this is the biggest case of money, sex, or power that I have ever seen. And once again, I mentioned Dr. Phil had some comments about this, comparing it to Gypsy Rose Blanchard and all that. And I know some people are just shaking their head already when they hear Dr. Phil, but he said something interesting, that the reason why that he became a psychologist, when he was about 12 years old, he said that he was just really wanted to know, why do people think the way they do, and what are they thinking when they do it? That was kind of a motivation for him to become a psychologist. On this channel, we talk so much about why do people do the things they do, right? But I am someone who is not a psychologist, I'm not an academic. What I'd like to stay away from is, what are people thinking when they do it? If Dr. Phil wants to tackle that mystery, good luck. I mean, that's all for him. But the reason is, it comes to a certain point when unraveling the thinking of a madman is impractical. And it also comes to a certain point where it's like you're just using a certain amount of guesswork. I don't want to know exactly what was going through Chris Watts' head when he was trying to smother his own daughters. I don't really want to know that. What I just want to look at is the kind of environmental reason about why this heinous tragedy happened. And it seems like purely material benefit and a complete disregard for human life. This definitely would fall into sort of the type of narcissistic personality. Somebody who can feel the emotions of shame and guilt and just those are the public emotions. You know, not like anger and sadness and like a fear. Shame and guilt, embarrassment. These are public. They happen when other people can expose your weaknesses. And he definitely shows those things. The other thing that we would just want to say is that the lie detector, the polygraph examiner was very instrumental in this. Once again, we have all the primary source information there. You can see the entire Chris Watts polygraph test. And one of the real turning points in the case was that the polygraph examiner just completely owned him. I can't think of a better word. And the thing with that is just we have to recognize a lot of people do not like polygraph testing. I am someone who actually has a higher opinion of polygraphs than a lot of other people. I have a high opinion of these things, but whether you think they work or you think they don't work, it was instrumental in getting him to confess because of the way that the investigators went about it, and he was indeed lying because he brought them to where the bodies were, he confessed, he got caught, and it was the end for him. Somebody who had it all. Beautiful wife, house, career, beautiful children. Threw it all away. For what? His own selfishness, his own ignorance. To think that he would actually get away with this. I mean, they have security cameras showing him carrying the body of his wife into a truck. It's just like, not even for a second would he have gotten away with this. And that's just pathetic. But once again, material selfishness knows no boundaries. So the issue is, though, when we're kind of dealing with a case like this, I think the things that we can come away from this are just be careful in life, trust very few people, question everybody, question everyone in your life, but also remember that not every person is going to be as dark as Chris Watts or as destructive as Chris Watts. And when we discuss cases like this, it's really just to gain a deeper understanding of the world around us, not necessarily to shed only dark and tragic information, but also just to learn more about the world, because that's what humans do. We try to learn more. That's all for me now. Until next time.